Hi everyone, I'm Sarah. Welcome to Low-sal-life. I guess you're here because you might have some suspicions that you might have a food-related issue. So I have definitely been there. I have gone through the gamut and the works and the doctor's appointments and the pain and the brain fog and everything. So I want to talk today about 10 things where you can go with food sensitivities that you may have missed or not know about, or maybe your doctors have overlooked. Little things that can help you figure out what it is that are affecting you. So you may have one thing, you may have many. So let's look into what the possibilities are. I'll also talk a little bit about my personal sensitivities or allergies and how it fits into this. So let's get going. I've got some slides here. So what most people, and where I started in 2006 is with allergies. And this is what we know most about. This is what there's doctors for to treat. They can be very severe, and this is pretty much where you start. And for me, this is where I started and kind of stopped in the same year because I didn't know where else to go. That's why I'm making this video. So true allergies are reactions to proteins, and your body makes these things called IgE antibodies, and basically your body marks a type of food or some kind of stimulus, and when it recognizes it, it senses it as a danger, and so your body reacts. These often show up in childhood. Sometimes they can be outgrown. They can show up later on in adulthood. It doesn't seem like there's much of a rhyme or reason. Of course, they do run in families, so that's one pattern that we can see. So they can be mild or severe, and they can be something as small as a few hives. You get a little bit itchy, to full-blown anaphylaxis, which is a complete dysregulation of your body, and you most often, like the final worst form of anaphylaxis is when you go into shock and your airways swell up and you can't breathe, which could lead to death. There's lots of different forms of anaphylaxis. There's different levels of that. We'll get into that some other day. I do want to address that there is a myth that says that, if you have some mild reactions today, then they could become more severe in the future. That is true. What is not true is that it could be progressive or kind of like a stair step to severity. You can have a really mild allergy on the first reaction, and it can be super severe on the second reaction, and it might be mild on a third reaction. So there's no stair step to danger. So if you have a mild allergy, don't mess around with it. Just avoid it. These are things where if you come in contact with it, you're going to have a reaction. There's no doubt about it. It's not like some of the other sensitivities we're going to talk about where you can manage it by dose. Okay, allergies can be either environmental or food related. For the environmental testing, there are skin prick tests available. There's a skin test where they'll poke your skin. It's usually on your arm or your back. There's also an intradermal skin prick test, and that's just a little bit lower. And sometimes some allergies can show up with that. And for food, those are usually not done by skin prick tests. Those are usually done with blood tests or by challenging the food. So it's a little hard to identify food allergies too, because it can be dangerous. You can really only test one food at a time. Unlike environmental, you can go and have a panel of 50 trees on your back, and there's no problem with that. So with food tests, you can't do that. You can't throw 5 different allergens down your stomach and see if you react to them. You have to do it very systematically. And it can be a little bit dangerous. Where a environmental one, you can just get a little tiny bit on your skin, and that might not be as dangerous as consuming wheat if you're allergic to it. Okay, so that's true allergies. That was my first allergy appointment. I thought every time I ate, I got sick. If I didn't eat, I felt great. So obviously food was my problem. I went and saw my allergist, my new allergist, and it didn't go well because I don't have true allergies. I do have some environmental allergies. Let's see, grass pollen, feathers, and mites. Those are my true allergies. I also want to mention there's one more, there's another set of antibodies that have been useful or even have been used and may be kind of questionable. We're not really sure how everything works, obviously. Allergies are really, like the field of allergies are really new. It's about less than 120 years old. So there's these antibodies. You may come across IgA, IgG, and I saw another one the other day. It was like CPA or something like that. So there's some other antibodies, and there can be other tests with that. But this is the true protein, IgE, true allergy, and this is where, if you go talk to your doctor, this is what they're gonna talk about. Okay, so along the idea of proteins, there are other types of intolerances and sensitivities that may be related to protein. I listed a couple here. These don't necessarily affect a histamine reaction. So histamine reaction, we're going to talk about plenty today, but that is when you have histamine released from immune cells and you end up with sniffly nose, itchy eyes, hives, swelling of tissues, like maybe you get a really swollen eye or your airways swell up. It can also result in heart palpitations. There's histamine release sometimes that will result in diarrhea. That is what a histamine reaction looks like. In these cases, these intolerance and sensitivities won't trigger a histamine reaction, but they do trigger inflammation, and sometimes neurological effects can be seen. So gluten gliadin is a really big one. I included celiac there, and we'll talk about that in a second. There's also non-celiac gluten sensitivity. These are really popular. You probably come across it. Somebody's probably told you to check it out. The most studied subprotein of gluten is called alpha gliadin, and that is the one that is present, that definitely affects celiacs. But there are also other types of gliadins and other types of glutens, and I just came across that basically there's like gluten and gliadin in all grains. Now I did gluten-free. It did help me. I did it for 12 years from that 2006 mark until I guess 2018, and it did help. For me, it helped my migraines. And I'll talk about that more because it wasn't actually wheat or gluten that was causing my migraines, but it definitely helped. There is, let's see, Dr. Osborne with Gluten-Free Society. He was the one that made this claim. I haven't gone and looked into the research, but I'm not surprised by it, that there are many types of glutens and gliadins in all grains. So the argument is to be truly gluten-free, you probably should be grain-free. So if you know anything about that or have some resources, leave them in the comments. But I didn't think it was too important to know about to finish up this presentation. Celiac disease is a situation where if you consume gluten, your little villi will be attacked in your intestines, and those are really important to absorb nutrients in your body and help move things down. But the difference between celiac, even though you are reacting to a protein, it is actually not an actual allergic reaction like hives, and it is not mediated by IgE. So some people care about that. I don't care about it. If you get sick eating gluten, don't eat it. And you can probably consider that an allergy or sensitivity or intolerance. There's also situations where gluten in particular can cause neurological issues. I've seen lots of people talk about like grain brain or just having a hard time focusing. And then I've also seen people have gluten or wheat affect them in a way that gives them migraines. Not migraines. Yes, Sometimes people can have migraines from that, but I wanted to say seizures. So there's definitely at least one person out there that gets seizures from gluten. Casein is another protein that you may come across. Casein is the protein in milk or dairy, and some people can just be sensitive to casein alone. There is one other type of person that may react to only A1 dairy, so A2 dairy is better and easier for them to digest. So if you have a milk sensitivity, but it's not a milk allergy, you may want to tease it apart a little bit more and see if the A2 dairy might be better for you. I believe there are Jersey cows that have the A2 dairy, and then there's also some other dairies like I think sheep and goat may have the A2 dairy. But casein, the A1, A2, you can have it both from cows. Cow milk can have both types, but the A2 is a certain type of like variety of cow that makes that. Okay, my mic's in the way. Okay, there is, under proteins are made up of amino acids, and amino acids are the building blocks of life. So some people can react to amino acids. I'm going to talk about two situations, and this is why I wanted to bring this up, because sometimes there can be neurological effects from the food that you eat. And I wanted to say also in that it's that you may just be missing an enzyme due to genetics, or maybe a cofactor, which actually might be a vitamin. This next slide, this is somebody that left a comment on one of my videos, specifically my levodopa responsive dystonia video. As I've mentioned before, you can go watch the video, I have a neurological condition which causes muscular dystonia, and mine in particular is responsive to levodopa, so that's how they classify it. So this person was commenting they also had dystonia, but they realized they were reacting to certain proteins. So this is the first time hearing of salicylates. It is really interesting how small things in the diet can cause such serious problems. Then we get forced to do heavy research just to survive. Yes, I know that feeling. I may have an opposite issue since eating protein, specifically phenylalanine, increases all of my symptoms of dystonia and causes more. I suspect a BH4 deficiency for myself, as I can only tolerate about 2 grams of protein at each. Okay, so I wanted to show you this graphic, which is the pathway for, these are called catecholamines. These are neurotransmitters in your brain, and starting with some amino acids back here, and all the way to dopamine and adrenaline. So my point is that when we eat food, let's say we eat a piece of steak, we can consume both phenylalanine and tyrosine in that. And our body can use both of those subcomponents of protein, and we can make them into a whole bunch of things. So here you can see that tyrosine can be converted into 3 different things in the body. Sometimes they become thyroid hormones, sometimes they become melanin, and then other times they can be converted to levodopa and into dopamine. And then these here, norepinephrine, epinephrine, these are your adrenaline hormones after that. So all of these are important to be in the right balance in your body, especially for mood. Dopamine, levodopa, dopamine affects muscle tone. Like if I don't have enough dopamine in my body, then I am super rigid and I'm spasming over and over again. I accidentally just triggered one. Parkinson's disease is a disease of dopamine, and so the main treatment is to take levodopa for Parkinson's. So if you've seen anybody shaking or being really rigid or humpback and kind of having really poor muscle tone and coordination, that has to do with these chemicals here. So this is really important to me because I have these issues. So for this person that left a comment, what they were saying is that they have issues with phenylalanine. So if you are eating phenylalanine in your diet and you can't convert it into tyrosine with this enzyme here, and this cofactor, this is what they were mentioning, they were BH4 deficient. If you can't do this, if you're missing one part of this recipe here, then you're not going to make tyrosine, and that affects everything down here. And you're not going to, and then you're also going to have too much phenylalanine. So phenylalanine goes up and tyrosine stays low because you're not converting anything. And so it should be balanced. But in this case, if you're missing like an enzyme, so the way that this person circumvented this is by making their own protein drink without phenylalanine so that they can start here and move forward. So I do something really similar. And for all of you guys that follow, that have the levodopa responsive dystonia, I just found out today, I was trying to figure out what this enzyme here and cofactor was. And I was like, oh, maybe I have an issue with tyrosine hydroxylase. So I looked that up, and lo and behold, I have down here other names for levodopa responsive dystonia is tyrosine hydroxylase deficiency. Seriously, I have been diagnosed with this condition since 2011, and only today am I finding out that it's because of this enzyme. That would have been really helpful to know like 13 years ago. I took away the most important thing, and that was to take levodopa. I've got some here. It's always nearby me. But pretty much I've tried tyrosine before, and it can give me like heart palpitations and kind of make me feel anxious, and that can happen in people with tyrosine issues. But pretty much what ended up there is that, I'm consuming tyrosine, and rather than building up levodopa, I'm just building tyrosine, and then it's not being moved over to levodopa. Fortunately, tyrosine can be used in other ways in my body, but so that's helpful, unlike this other person that had a phenylalanine issue. But basically what I'm saying is that these here are components from food. If you have something genetic affecting you down here, then you may actually be affected by food, and it might be something like this. I want to go down a little tiny bit further because while these proteins may make you sick or kind of you're not feeling right, there could be, besides enzymes, sometimes there are vitamins necessary to make these conversions. And these are all over in the body. You can find lots of pathways all over. This one in particular is B6, the vitamin B6. P5P is the active form of it. That's a better version of the supplement to take. And then over here you see vitamin C. So, it's possible, let's say, that you're on a carnivore diet and you're chugging along and you're not getting very much vitamin C. Sure, you don't have scurvy, but maybe it's affecting you somewhere else. So, these are your stress hormones. So if you're super stressed out, you might be consuming a lot of vitamin C to make this adrenaline over here, but you might not have vitamin C for other things, like preventing scurvy or making DAO enzyme to combat histamine issues. Okay, so that's that. Over here, B6. This one's kind of interesting. I'm gonna get my B6 checked and see if I got an issue with this, because every little bit of levodopa, I want it to be converted into the good stuff. Next is an intolerance and sensitivities to sugars. So an intolerance basically means that you can't break it down. A sensitivity to me means more like you react to it, either in a small amount or a large amount, but you're just sensitive means that it's like you're responding to a stimulus. So intolerance, in these cases, it either builds up in the body because it's not being converted, or it's being fermented by bacteria in your gut. So here are a couple. One, lactose intolerant, and most people are familiar with that. That's, you don't have a protein allergy. You don't have a, protein issue with like casein, A1, A2. But in this case, lactose intolerance means that you don't have the lactase, which is an enzyme to break up the sugar. Lactose is a double sugar molecule, so you're basically trying to shoot and break up that sugar. And so if you don't have that enzyme, you can't drink milk unless you have lactate or like some kind of lactose-free milk. And that's how they do it. They just treat the milk with that enzyme so that it can happen in the carton rather than in your body. So that's why that works. FODMAPs is a popular diet. It's actually very helpful for some people. And the purpose of FODMAPs is just to remove certain sugars that your body can't break up. So these are all sugars: oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides. These are all types of sugars that are fermentable by bacteria in your gut. And so people end up having some issues with that. There's also one more here, polyols, that is a sugar alcohol. So sugar alcohols can be anything like mannitol. They usually end in OLs, like mannitol, sorbitol. And OL is usually like the end part of a word that is alcohol. Fructose intolerance, this one's a little bit more rare. I don't know anybody with fructose intolerance, but pretty much unable to break up the sugar fructose, and so they can't eat things like fruit or have sodas or things like that. But they might be okay with other sugars. Speaking of sugars, you could, if you're eating food and you're getting sick after it, but in the morning or maybe like a few hours after the morning, you know, you're in a fasted state and you feel good, or maybe you actually do a fast and you feel great. If it's not anything we've talked about so far, it may be a sugar issue. So most people are familiar with blood glucose issues or diabetes as an example. What happens is if you eat and you don't have, your body's not able to manage sugar very well, you may end up with too high of a blood sugar in your body. And too high of blood sugar in your body is actually toxic, so it can damage tissues and damage your nerves. The liver is taxed with managing the sugars and the hormones rather than managing other things, so it can make things more complicated. And then diabetes, which is a metabolic issue, ultimately affects mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. This is where all of your energy is managed for your cell. So you may end up with low energy because of this, and you can have mitochondrial issues for either related to sugar or related to fats and ketones. So if you do carnivore or keto diet or you do fasting, if you're not able to metabolize and manage your fats or ketones, they basically break up the fats or move them into the cells or different parts of the body. So if you can't utilize those because there's an issue with your mitochondria, you could definitely be feeling bad after that. And then the last thing is reactive hypoglycemia. This is an issue where it's more of an imbalance with your insulin. So you eat something, you have a blood sugar spike, which is normal. Having your blood sugar spike after you eat is completely normal. But the issue is if it stays there too long, that's where we end up with the diabetes too. So with hypoglycemia, your body actually goes, oh my gosh, we got to take care of this insulin. I mean, this high blood sugar. And so it drops it. And if this is normal, it drops it so low. So this happens about an hour or two after you eat. So if you're eating and you feel good, and then all of a sudden you get really sick, you might not be reacting to any kind of stimulus like protein or allergen or sugar, but you actually are experiencing hypoglycemia with that. So keep an eye on what it is that you eat, and then also when your reactions are, because that can be really helpful. Maybe even consider testing your blood glucose levels when you feel really bad. So sometimes I'll feel really bad and really down, especially after I eat. So I might just go check my either sugar. Well, I'll check my sugars, but if I'm also doing like a keto diet, which I cycle in and out of, I'll also check my ketones to make sure that I'm producing enough ketones. This here is also not related to stimulus, but it's related to feeling bad after you eat. So I've got a handful of things here. Basically, these are fat or protein digestion issues. So if your stomach just isn't working, you're going to feel bad after you eat. But these are some of the common things. One is that you might have some gallbladder or bile issues that's not able to break up the fat. So a lot of people will just stop, eating fat rather than trying to work on like improving their gallbladder function. You can take digestive enzymes to help with the breakdown of fat. There can also be a lack of enzymes, and we'll talk more about, I guess, in the context of protein. There are enzymes that you can have that will help, like there's amylase, protease. There's a handful of them you can take. You can buy a bottle of it as a supplement. I will add one thing here that I didn't include on a different slide, but if you have histamine intolerance, which is a reaction to foods high in amines or histamines, there is an enzyme that your body makes called DAO. I'll make another video about that. But DAO is an enzyme that breaks down histamine so it doesn't go into your body. And some people don't have the ability to make that very well. And you also need vitamin C and iron to make those. So if you're iron deficient like me, or if you're doing avoiding fruits and veggies, or on a carnivore diet and you don't have vitamin C for those, you might end up with more problems with that DAO enzyme. Stomach acid is another issue with breaking down foods. Unfortunately, low stomach acid increases your chance of having food sensitivities or allergies later. We'll do a video on that in the future. But if you are on anything like any kind of peptide, like proton pump inhibitor, if you're on anything like that, it's kind of counterintuitive, but the more acid you have in your stomach, the more that little valve on the top is going to close. And so by reducing your stomach acid, you're actually perpetuating having this issue over and over again. But because low stomach acid prevents you from digesting your food and also increases your chance for food sensitivities, it's really a bad place to be. Now, I've done a PPI before, probably about 6 weeks. I had an ulcer from an infection, Helicobacter pylori, and it was great. I used it for a small portion of time. My ulcer healed, and I was able to get back to no more of those PPIs. Okay, there's another thing called leaky gut. Now, if you're a medical snob, the true term is intestinal permeability. Don't let any medical snobs tell you that leaky gut's not a real thing. Leaky gut is what we call it casually because it resonates with people. But intestinal permeability is the actual medical condition. If you know, you know. But other than that, we'll move on. Damaged mucosal layer. So you have a little bit of slime along your intestines and also on your stomach. And sometimes that can be degraded and that can cause all sorts of problems. There's also underlying SIBO or an infection. So in my case, I was really, really sick when I had Helicobacter pylori. There's other infections that you can have. That's pretty broad, but if you eat and you feed it, whatever it is, that's going to be some problems. So just go and get checked out if you can. Most of you guys are probably here because you've already been checked out and you're probably, at a blank slate right now. So I also want to mention that neurological issues can cause motility problems. So this point here is that most of us think of a bottom-up approach. Like if my stomach hurts, then I should fix my stomach. But if any of you guys have been diagnosed with IBS, like I have been in the past, you may have been put on some kind of, got asked profusely by your GI stomach doctor about stress and about being nervous and kind of some of these like wellness thoughts. The fact is that from top down, your brain can affect your stomach. No surprise there. But, for somebody like me who has muscle issues and you're dealing with smooth muscle for your stomach, there could really be some issues there. So don't just look at your stomach, look at other things further up that could be affecting your stomach. And those really have a lot to do with movement. So that's why nervous people, like if you're a nervous person, you might have more of a nervous stomach and things might just go through you a little bit faster. The last one I want to mention is POTS. or low blood pressure after eating. Shoot, I didn't look up what POTS meant. Let me look it up real quick here. It's long. It is postural tachycardia syndrome, and the low blood pressure, pretty much after you eat, you have a bunch of blood go to your stomach and intestines. And if you are somebody like me that has low blood pressure issues and all your blood goes to your stomach, you may not have a lot of blood for your brain. I'm not diagnosed with POTS, but that is basically your blood pressure drops and then your heart starts beating really fast to make sure that it gets blood everywhere. Sometimes you might faint, but the low blood pressure thing with eating is a big thing. So if you eat and you get tired, then go and lay down. And then also keeping an eye on your blood pressure after you eat may be really helpful information you can take to your doctor and say, hey, every time I eat, I have this reaction and my blood pressure was, 85/50. That'll get their attention. They'll start looking at more places. Wait a second. Oh no. Shoot, I guess I have 11 things to talk about because I misnumbered my slides. Okay, 5A. This one I'm going to talk about as far as chemicals, whether they're natural or synthetic. So the first one, I'm going to talk about natural examples, and this is really what my whole channel is about. What I didn't know was that you can be allergic to chemicals. The issue is that if you use the term allergic in these situations, you won't be listened to because it's not an allergy. So you have to learn new words to describe it. Sensitivity is probably the best one to describe, especially in relation to the salicylates, sulfites, and glutamate, because your body is reacting. For amines and histamines, that can be more of an issue where you can't break it down. So being intolerant is probably more appropriate. However, you can also react to histamine. So either one is fine. But salicylates, that's what I'm sensitive to. It's basically aspirin is, the more pharmaceutical version, but it can be in anything. Lots of fruits, veggies, fragrances, spices, some oils, pretty much in everything. Amines, this one can be more challenging because you can have a protein that is fine when you eat it fresh, but not fine when you eat it a different way. If you have issues with leftovers, definitely look at histamine intolerance. For me, I've been having issues with some amines. I know I've been very proud to say I haven't had any histamine issues, but I react to stewed meat. I get really sick from stewed meat. And then also I've been reacting to wet aged meat. So meat can be fresh, and that's usually where you get it at the grocery store. It can be sealed in a package, hermetically sealed and aged. That's a wet aged. And then there's also a dry aged or like a cured. That one is not done in liquid. And so I'm not rich enough for the good aged stuff, but the wet aged definitely react, and the stewed meat. So kind of sad about that. Glutamate is another one, and that can be found in natural foods. It can also be synthetic, and that one has a really excitatory response, especially neurologically. And sulfites can be natural in foods, but it's also synthetic. So all of these can be natural or synthetic, but you wouldn't think about a lot of fruits and vegetables being bad for you, but for some of us, like me, it's pretty much poison. All right, this one here is about some examples of synthetic. I put caffeine on there. I do not react to caffeine at all. I love that stuff. I do not drink it in coffee because coffee has salicylates, and I don't drink it in tea, same thing. I do consume it as a pill, pharmaceutical product. I love it. Aspartame is, some of these like sugar substitutes could be a problem. Dyes, colorings, preservatives, all different things that could be synthetic. I should have put like medicines on there, but those are some of the big ones, and those can be in your foods. I did a video on annatto affecting people, and so annatto is kind of a natural dye. It's in achote. They use it to color cheese yellow, and a lot of people can have issues with annatto. All right, this one is one that I had a problem with, so I wanted to bring it to people's attention, especially if you are migraine sufferers. So I suffered from migraines, and I've had them since I was a child, but they got really, 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 really bad when I was 17. And what happened when I was 17 is that the US started their food fortification program for wheat products. And this is the reason why going wheat-free solved my problem a little bit. But pretty much folic acid, which we all know is good for us, right? At least that's what we're told. Folic acid is a synthetic form of vitamin B9. And you can see it here is coming in, it gets converted, and then it enters this circle. So down here, there's dietary folate. And this is like what you would get if you ate spinach. Dietary folate would come in here. And then it can come here and interact with B12 and go off on this other system. So what ended up happening, kind of like what we were looking at with the amino acids, if you have one of these things off, like you can end up with either too much folic acid, too much of one thing, and not enough of the other. So for whatever reason in the system, I ended up having migraines. They were really bad when I was 17. When I was about mid-20s, I went gluten-free for 12 years, and I went from having 5 migraines a week to having like 1 migraine a month or 1 migraine like a quarter. It was amazing. As food started getting fortified over more products, I had to start removing more and more food. I didn't know why. I just knew that soy milk made me sick, or that the maseca, which I made corn tortillas with, made me sick. And through these steps over the next 12 years, I had to keep taking more and more food away. And what it was is it wasn't the food, it was the folic acid that was in my food, and that's what I was reacting to. So I'll show you the reason why this one in particular, this is called the methylation cycle, but folic acid comes in here. And some of us, about a third of the population, has a variation on the MTHFR, which is it's an enzyme. If you have a modification on this, then you're not going to be able to take the folic acid and make it into this methylfolate. So you end up with either a lot of folic acid and not the type of folate that you need in order to go into the rest of this. And you can get pretty messed up. I do want to discourage people from saying that this is a defect or a mutation. I don't think that that's the right way to refer to this, especially with a third of the population having some kind of variation on that. I think it's really important that we just say a variation rather than using these negative connotations. First of all, just because you have the gene doesn't mean that you're going to have the phenotype or the output of what that gene may code for. Hey everyone, so I am a little bit of an airhead, and even though I messed up the slides earlier, I think I must have taken slide 7 and moved it to slide 5. So anyway, my numbers are all messed up. But what I wanted to do was take this opportunity to include slide 7, which was about fiber. So some people don't do well with fiber. And some people don't know that because their doctors still tell them to do a high fiber diet. So I've been diagnosed with IBS 3 times. I don't think I have IBS because I have salicylate sensitivity, and that's what causes my symptoms. But regardless, what I learned is as my doctor told me to increase fiber, every time I tried to increase fiber, I actually felt worse. In my mid-20s, when I was dealing with all of this, I actually had come across a couple of studies. Dr. Salisbury had quite a few patients that he put on a low-fiber diet. That's where the Salisbury steak comes from. And then also I came across another article that was about Crohn's disease and how people who went on a meat diet had an improvement of their symptoms. I'm pretty sure it was either Crohn's or diverticulitis. That's just what I had found when I was in my 20s. But this study is interesting because it's a little bit newer, and it is a control group, a treatment versus control group, and it was done in 2012. Now, this is the name of the study if you want to look it up. Stopping or reducing dietary fiber intake reduces constipation and its associated symptoms. I just want to point out these doctors here who worked on this. The next slide is from Dr. Mason. So I don't think he was involved in the study, but he definitely uses it as a teaching tool. And this is his slide, it is not mine. But I want to show you here that there are 3 treatment groups here: high fiber, reduced fiber, and zero fiber. These are the symptoms. So constipation, strain, opening, bloating, anal bleeding, and pain. And this is the baseline diet. So the baseline diet was that everybody was high fiber diet, and then so everybody started with the same, and everybody had bad symptoms, and they were asked to go on a zero fiber diet for a little bit to heal from their issue, but they were allowed for 6 months to go on a different diet, and then they kept track of those symptoms. So you can see here that as fiber decreased, that some people completely healed. And the important thing about this baseline diet is that they ended up having, everybody had symptoms. So it's not like, like these people here on the zero fiber diet, they reacted poorly to the high fiber diet. But once they went zero, they got way better. These are direct quotes from the paper, and you can see here that all patients were already on a high fiber diet. At 6 months, 41 continued on a no fiber diet. So it's pretty amazing that out of, let's see, it was 41 plus 16 plus 6. This is extremely high retention for a treatment plan. So that means that it was working and people did not want to go back to a reduced or high fiber diet. They wanted to stay on the no fiber diet. So 6 patients did not want to continue because they were vegetarian or they had religious or personal reasons. And here are the results. 41 patients completely stopped fiber intake and had their bowel frequency increased. This was specifically about constipation. So they were going from having bowel movement every 3 to 4 days to 1 per day. For symptoms of bloating, all of those on a high fiber diet continued to be symptomatic, and here you can see that none of the no fiber group had symptoms. With straining, all those on a no fiber diet no longer had to strain to pass stools, and symptoms of abdominal pain only improved in patients who stopped fiber completely. So people who had a reduced fiber diet still continued to have abdominal pain. Oh yeah, and this one's also important. In addition, those on a no dietary fiber diet no longer had symptoms of anal bleeding. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that because I've done really well on a no to reduced fiber diet, and this is a control study that shows that as you decrease fiber, at least in patients who are symptomatic, that they will have a decrease in pain. All right, back to slide 8. Let's talk about cross reactions. This is where it gets really challenging when you start having reactions and you're like, but I don't understand, because sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't. So I want to talk about cross reactions. One is that the oral allergy syndrome, this one here is an IgE true allergy issue. And I put some pictures here. Let's say you are allergic to birch pollen, one of those environmental IgE reactions. What the body does is it goes, oh, okay, I got a birch pollen here, we've got a perfect fit, and we're going to flip out. So it fits there. But what the body's not super good at is when something of a different shape comes through, but it still fits. So this is a lock and key scenario. Different key, same lock, and it still fits. Even though the tail end of it's not the same. So in that case, you can still trigger your birch allergy issue, and just by eating other foods. So birch, there's a whole bunch. There's birch and grass. I cut out apples for years before salicylate. I found out about salicylates. Apples, especially the kind that I was reacting to, was one food that I knew to cut out early. So the one nice thing about this, and I do know a couple people with this, especially with birches, but it's crazy to me because they can still eat apples cooked because it denatures the protein in a way that the birch receptor is not going to recognize it. So it is kind of interesting, but that might be one of your issues where you react to apples. Sometimes you don't react to apples. That was my case for salicylates. I'd react to apple juice, dried apples, and not so much just a fresh apple. The other thing about this is you may react to apples only during the springtime when birch pollen is active, and not so much like during the winter, because your allergen load's lower and your body's not flipping out and on high alert. Okay, I also have another thing here. I'm kind of exploring with this a little bit more because this doesn't help with the salicylate issue, but sometimes I react to foods and sometimes I don't, and I haven't figured it out. So I'm going to start keeping track of when my food reactions are, let's say to cabbage. That's one that always baffles me. Maybe it's not that there's variation in cabbage, in the salicylate levels of cabbage, but maybe it's a variation in my own body where, maybe during luteal phase, I'm more reactive versus a later phase in my cycle. So that could be something. Other hormones that you could consider are those stress hormones that could also affect how you handle food. And it might be counterintuitive. Maybe when you're long-term stressed out, you don't react to foods as much, but when you calm down, you do react. And that would completely make sense too, where the cortisol from your stress reaction, that actually really dampens your immune system, so you don't have reactions. So I could see either stress affecting your reactions, or maybe during high stress, it actually decreases your reactions. So I could see that going both ways. For histamine and salicylates, this one's kind of challenging with the bucket analogy. So basically I kind of like to think about it as money. Let's say you have, 10 units of money come in and you can spend 10 units of money. But if you ended up spending 12 units of money, you're going to be in the hole by 2, and being in debt, it sucks. So if you can imagine that, if you are, every day eating, having like 3 pennies of we'll say dollars, $3 of what's a medium food? Mango. Let's say 3 points for mango. You never react to mango. And then the next day you have, something like some mushrooms. And let's say that's 1 point. So you have 1 point of mushrooms, 3 points of mango. So all of a sudden you react to mango. And then you're like, that's so weird. I didn't react to mango yesterday, but I'm reacting to it today. So think about how these chemicals can build up. As far as the bucket goes, like my folic acid, because I don't eat fortified food very often anymore, I can get away with eating a normal bagel that's full of folic acid, and it's not going to bother me anymore. I don't get migraines from them. I can have 3 days worth of fortified food in a row and I don't have a reaction. But once you start getting to 7-10 days worth of that, absolutely get a reaction from it. So just think about that as far as fill the bucket. Once it overflows, that's when you're going to see the reaction. And it might be just a really low salicylate food, but because you had some high salicylates earlier that day or the day before, that's something to consider. And I will say for salicylates, you really should be looking at like up to 3 to 5 days and not just what you consumed that day. Okay, let's talk about food and exercise. This one's so weird and fun. Fun if you don't have it, fun to learn about, but there's a thing called exercise-induced anaphylaxis. So this is where you end up having an allergic reaction due to exercise. And that's just going for a run and exercising. Yep, it's true. Okay, there's also a food-dependent exercise-induced anaphylaxis, and this is when you combine exercise with a food where exercise you don't react and the food you don't react, but you combine them together and you do react. So these tend to be a little bit more extreme, so doctors, and they're weird and people remember that these things exist, so doctors are more likely to describe them. But what if you only have a mild reaction? You might not end up at the doctor. So, just kind of keep an eye on these. These were some that I found that were mixed with exercise. I want to mention, first of all, alcohol is on there. I did read a study where a woman reacted to shellfish when she exercised. And I do want to bring this one up because these two caught my attention. If you are dealing with meat allergies, meat sensitivity, especially to mammal meat, and you didn't get an alpha-gal IgE verification, you might want to look at some of these things. Like, are you exercising or are you stressed when you're reacting to these meat products? Because that could be your problem. Okay, yep. And I also found somebody else. Grapefruit seems to be common with exercise for having these types of reactions. All right, and the last one. This is probably the most wild form and probably most of our problems. I'm working through a mast cell activation syndrome diagnosis right now, so we'll see where this goes. But pretty much if you react to anything else that isn't anything that I mentioned before and you still can't figure it out, mast cells are immune cells in our body. They're not really related to the IgE allergic response, but any of these things, emotion, pressure, vibration, infection, venom, so like bee stings, snake bites, things like that, exercise, fatigue, cold, heat, and sunlight, if you react to any of these and you've mentioned it and people just think you're crazy, you probably aren't crazy. It's probably a mast cell issue. There's a couple of different issues with mast cells. There is mastocytosis and mast cell activation disease. This one here, I really hate saying it's the mildest out of all of them because it's pretty much terrible. But this here is probably the first place you want to check if you want to talk to your doctor. Don't go and say, you have one of these other big mast cell issues unless you have like tumors or something like that. But start here and say, I have some weird things going on. Can you tell me about mast cell activation syndrome? There's been some newer classifications for it. And the gist here, I wrote some of the gist, but 2 or more symptoms. So if you have a digestive issue with neurological issues, or you have a skin issue with digestion, or any kind of combination of your biological systems, if you have 2 or more, that's one check mark you can have. If you respond to antihistamines, so I do really well with Benadryl. Man, I love that stuff. Keeps me alive. Okay, antihistamines, if you do well with them, that's another checkbox. And then I do want to say that you don't have to have a histamine reaction in order to qualify for mast cell activation syndrome. You can have inflammation. And I did hear a story by Tanya Dempsey. Dr. Dempsey has some really great videos, and I put her website down here so you can go and learn about it. She had a story about how pretty much she treated one of her patients, a little boy who really was having a hard time with neurological issues, and he had some stomach problems. And so they ended up treating the stomach problems with some, they use cromolyn sodium, and they ended up really helping him out mentally. But the point is that he wasn't having a histamine issue, he was having neurological issues, and they were able to treat it because she had the wherewithal to think that maybe he was dealing with mast cell activation syndrome. For all of you guys who have gotten to where I am, where you're like, yes, I have salicylate sensitivity, yes, I have histamine issues, and you've been content with that and that diagnosis, and you found kind of a new status quo, this might be something you want to look into. It's something I'm looking at, especially since it affects me neurologically. And yeah, you're definitely going to hear a lot more videos about this in the future from me. Okay, my apologies that this was so long. I was thinking this was going to be like 20 minutes. What are we at? Yeah, we're almost at an hour, 53 minutes. Well, this stuff is not easy. I hope this helps somebody. If you want to check out some more videos, let's see. Oh, if you want to know more about my story, if this is the first time you've been here, check out this video, and this kind of tells you more about my progression of how I got to where I am today, or at least 4 years ago. All right, see you later. Bye.